Howdy guys, Bookie Laura here. Now this year I have decided to make a change. I still want to review all the books that I'm reading because it's something I really enjoyed doing last year, but I found it was really time consuming doing separate videos. So I'm going to go back to doing a kind of wrap-up style video, still keeping the time limit and actually reducing it, but then reviewing all the books that I've read in that one wrap-up video. So I changed this time around because I've actually read so many books that it would make a really long video. And I'm not a fan of long videos, so I'm splitting it into two. So this is part one of my January wrap-up. January was a really good reading month for me. I don't quite know how I've done it, but I've managed to read 11 books in January, which is a great start to the year. I usually read about one a week, so that's huge. And I think for me a big part of that was that I'm reading more audiobooks. Look at the angle of my camera. Anyway, I'm reading more audiobooks or listening to more audiobooks, and that has increased the number that I'm getting through quite dramatically because I've read, I think, 3 audiobooks this month and also an online comic. Stay tuned for all of those. So as I did last year, I'm going to set a timer on my phone, but this time around, because I'm trying to do them all in one go, I'm going to set it for like 1 minute, in which time I want to kind of tell you briefly what the book is about, although not a lot of detail, and then roughly tell you what I thought of it. So let's see how that goes. So the first book I'm going to tell you about is Sleeping Beauties, which is by Stephen King and Owen King. It basically tells the story that one day, out of nowhere, women start to sort of fall asleep and a cocoon forms around them that can't be removed. If it's removed, then they go crazy and kill people. And it's kind of the discovery, I think, of what on earth is going on and what's going to happen now. I enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars, and I think for me, I'm a big Stephen King fan, and even though it was a really long book, which often puts me off, I still enjoyed it. And I think that's because it's split. It sort of, parts of the book were told by different characters, and actually I really enjoyed that, and it helped it to not feel so intense in a kind of Game of Thrones style-y. There were some significant issues around sexism that were discussed as part of it, which I enjoyed. The story didn't overly grip me, but I think, yeah, it wasn't really plot driven, but I really enjoyed it, and at the end of it I was glad I read it. The second book which I read was Artemis Fowl by somebody Colfer. Please tell me how to pronounce his name because I have no idea. This is because I am taking part in the Artemis Fowl read-along that's happening this year, that's done by Paige Screen Taylor and Cara from Wild Book Garden and somebody else whose name I do not know. Please get involved. I've always been keen to read these books but never really got around to it. It's a middle grade, not middle-aged like I was about to say, a middle grade kind of magical adventure story. Fantasy, it's definitely fantasy, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. The one thing for me which I didn't enjoy was actually the characters are all hideous, but I think that you get more to know them as the series goes on, and I was more inclined to like them at the end than at the start. But it's really also introduced me to fantasy because it's kind of got fairies and other such whimsical creatures, which is something I didn't think I enjoyed, but I really enjoyed this book. Oh, I am cracking on with these 1 minute timers today. Oosh. So the next book which I read, or rather listened to, was the audiobook version of Patrick Ness's Release. I picked this purely based on the fact that it was a Patrick Ness book. It tells a story of a main character who we learn very quickly on is he is gay and has a relationship with a boy, comes from a very church-based family, and it's kind of a lot of that teen angst thing going on. It's very, very YA. But on the flip side, it also has this other story that's being told alongside it about a girl who is very mysterious and you're not really sure what's going on. And to be honest, that's one of the things that I found most negative about this book, because I didn't really understand the 2 narratives, and I found that every time it flipped to the girl's perspective I found myself going, oh no, I don't want to listen to this bit. It discusses again, as YA books do, a lot of important things, and I can see how they're really important to people who are the target audience, but I am not, so I found it very teen angsty. The next book which I read was The Light Jar by Thompson. This basically tells the story, you're introduced to a boy whose name is Nate, and his mum, who are basically running away in the middle of the night and they go to a cottage to escape, but you're not quite sure at the start what they're escaping from, and that's sort of slowly revealed through the book. His mum goes off, I think, to buy food and doesn't come back, and it's his story of what goes on then. And I think this is a very character-driven book. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's very middle grade, but that's not a bad thing. I loved it, and I really liked the fact, I love when middle grade books explore things that really need exploring, and this actually explores issues of domestic violence and abuse and things that actually children find so difficult to talk about. And it was all about sort of his journey, I think, to being able to process and talk about what he'd gone through. But an enjoyable story as well, because he's quite adventurous. 1 minute is turning out to be the perfect amount of time. And then the final book, which I'm going to talk about in this part 1 of the wrap-up, is TJ and Amal, which I don't know who it's by, but it's an online comic that Ollie Bliss introduced me to. I think that he must have read it earlier in the year, and I was watching earlier in the year or end of last year, and I was watching one of his videos and he mentioned it, and I thought, do you know what, why not? I'm trying to expand my horizons and to read some more sort of LGBTQ stuff, and Ollie Bliss is the perfect place to get recommendations from. And as it was online, it didn't cost me anything. I'm not a massive fan of graphic novels, but again, it wasn't costing me anything, so I thought I'd give it a go. And it tells the story of Amal, who had an arranged marriage and escaped because he was gay, and then meets a character called TJ, and they go on a road trip together, and it's very much road trip relationship bonding, and it is really beautiful. I thought I would hate it when they first started to get together. I was like, oh, it feels so cliche, but by the end of it you are completely invested in the relationship, and I found myself, oh, I'm not finished. I found myself at the end thinking I wanted to know more. I wanted to know how this was going to carry on between them, which is always a good sign. But just a heads up, it is very graphic. Very graphic. A graphic novel should be a clue, but I wasn't expecting it to be graphic in that sense. Oh, and by the way, I gave that one a 3 stars. Graphic novels ain't for me, but as graphic novels go, it was pretty good. So those are the first 5 books which I read in January. Thank you. I'm going to share this. I am 100% great, apparently. Oh, a bit further. There we go. Very nice. Those are the first 5 books which I've read in January, and I've had a really good month, and I'm going to upload at some point the second video, which is going to include the other 6. Look out for that soon. If you've read any of the books that I've mentioned, then let me know. Particularly, I want to know who's taken part in the Artemis Fowl read-along. I think it's a read-along. I would like to know who's taken part in that, because I'm enjoying it so far. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.